Well, hello everyone. I don't know if this started streaming when I intended it to. I was having some technical problems, so I was away for a bit. So this might be when the live stream is actually starting. So I'll start over again. So in the last live stream, we started putting together this little library scene, and which we're trying to work to do all completely procedurally. I made some books before this a few weeks ago. And again, these are all just boxes, just cubes, and all of this detail that we see here is added in shader nodes. And so I just improved upon that in the last video. So I thought I would get back on today because I had such fun during the last live stream that I would try again. So there are a few things I would like to accomplish with this today. One of the things that I had been thinking about is if I could take this book and other books that use the same material and add little gibberish titles so that from a distance when you see them in the background it looks like there's little gold flake kind of embossed titles in like English or something like that. And a few other things. What were a couple of the other things? One of the things I also want to do is take this effect that I made where if I get the angle right and let that render a little bit to where the front of the book kind of looks like it's curved, like our references. Let me bring up our references here, because as we see the spines of the books are curved, and we did that in the shader editor, but I found a little something that I kind of have a problem with. That is, since this actually is just a box, just a cube, it actually is flat. And if you're seeing this book at an angle, like if it's laying down, face down or something on the shelf, you might be able to tell, even though this is meant to be kind of a background thing. So I thought that what we would do is remove what we did in the shader and just have that shape happen actually in geometry nodes. Other than that, I think what we'll also do at some point is work on improving this wood texture that we made, which I neglected to finish in the last live stream. So we'll be doing that, adding little wood grains in there. So let's see how we can do this. So I'm going to switch to solid view. And I thought about how to do this a little bit, but I might be sort of winging this, so we'll see what happens. But the nice thing is since we set up a few things so that a lot of the things that control the way our book looks is completely procedural, we actually can have more than one book. We can have an array of books, and we'll have to make a little bit of a setting to make this same material work on multiple objects in the same thing. So I guess that's another thing. I'll see if I can make an array of books, which let me just show you the problem with that right now as well. I think I had an array modifier. Yes, I do. So if I turn that array modifier on, we see we get several different books, and the system that colors them differently works. So each book has a different color. I'd like them also to have a random size, so we'll see if we get around to doing that today. But this whole system that we had that adds the cover and the pages, we notice that scales up with the entirety of the books here. You can see that the cover that was just on the that used to be just on the little let me move over here. That used to be just on the edge here. We see that cover portion of our material takes up that whole first book by coincidence. If we turn the number of books up, we can see that expand just with the size of the whole thing. So that's something that we ought to fix today as well. And actually that's a bit of the easier thing because I already did that in a test. So I'm going to do that first actually, and then we'll see if we can add that little curvature to it. Since that's probably the easiest thing, since I already know how to do that. I've already tested that. So what I'm going to do, let's look at our node tree and just remind ourselves of what this does. So we generated a cube. That's what makes the book shape. And then we went over here to get a bounding box. That was so that we could get the scale of each book, of each box. And of course set material. And then we stored that attribute over here. And that way we could use that so that as we scale our book, make it thicker or longer or taller, then the cover always stays the same width and the proportions remain consistent. hello to 2 people that are watching so far. Thanks for logging in. See what kind of trouble I get into today, or what kind of errors I come across. So I think probably the best way to do, let's just do 2 books for now, just make it easy just to test our system here. So I am going to copy this, I suppose, and I'm going to put it through another. Tell you what I'm going to do first. I'm going to take this set material, and I'm going to alt click. Oh, let me turn on my screen capture keys just so that people can see what keyboard shortcuts I'm using, just in case anyone needs that. And I'm going to put this over here. That way our material is set on all of the books that we create, because we'll be joining all the books somewhere there. So let me also add a join geometry right away. Put that here. And I'm going to copy this setup so that we can detect the scale of the second book as well. And something that we're going to have to do first, because I think in the test I conducted, yeah. So I'm going to take this join geometry and I'm going to move it after our capture attribute, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. But we're going to need to capture the attribute here as well. This is a little bit complicated, but once I have this together a little bit more, I'll kind of explain what's going on. That is, if I even know what's going on. So I'm going to make it to where we can see both of these books, and at first we should see an error because both of these books are overlapping each other. So I'm going to add a translate, I suppose, or transform geometry? Yeah, transform. And let's move our book over, what, on the x-axis? Yeah, let's move it the other direction just because. Okay, now we have 2 books. One thing that I forgot to mention in the last live stream, I mentioned to those who might not know, you can go over to your scene properties here, and we can make my head to disappear so we can see what I'm doing here. Well, you can switch it to metric or imperial if you want feet and inches or meters, but you can also click this thing that says separate units right above my head right here. And that way you can see meters and centimeters, and that might be handy, or feet and inches. I'm going to do that so that I can type in centimeters a little easier. I'm just going to type in -5 centimeters, I suppose. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to increase the thickness of this book just so that it is a little bit different, and we can test a couple of our systems on it. Okay, so now again we still have the same problem that the one cover thing that we created for this whole thing is being applied to the whole object, to the whole series of books here. That's physically a series, although maybe in the book sense, maybe this is a series as well. So we need to fix that first. So we have both of these things captured here. But what we need to do, okay, so we have a store named attribute. And I think what we need to do is get rid of this one, because this store named attribute over there is what our shaders is using. We can only have one of these because there's only one name that we can use in the shaders. So let me alt and put this over here so that that gets stored over here. What we need to do first is we need to add a capture attribute, and I believe we can just put it over this bounding box here, and I might be wrong, but if so, I have a plan B. We need to change this to a vector, wherever vector is, float vector, there we go. Change both of these to vector, and we will plug the size in here. And again, if there are new viewers that weren't present yesterday, what this does is this captures the scale of our book. So again, these books have a different thickness, and we use this later so that depending on the thickness of the book, it changes what happens in our shaders, so that even if we have a very thick book or a very thin book, the cover is always a consistent thickness of like 2 millimeters, I think is what we did for that. So we need to capture that for each book, at least right now. If we have like 10 or 20 books, that would probably get monotonous, but maybe we'll come up with a better solution before doing that. And let's see what this looks like now. Of course it looks awful. So we need to add a vector math node. which again, I have my own keyboard shortcut. You can search Shift A and search for vector math. Let's add these two together. And now we plug this into the attribute that we are capturing. And that does not work. So therefore, plan B. And I think this is what I tried in my test earlier, and I didn't think it was going to work, but actually it worked better than doing it this way. So just to clarify, what we have here is we have our initial cubes that we created to make our books. And then we turned it into a bounding box object, which in principle is the same thing, it's just a cube. But we did that so that we can get the size of our cube, the minimum and maximum, you know, the left to the right, minimum to maximum, the front to the back, the top to the bottom, minimum and maximum. But instead what we can do is, and we will need to do this later on anyway, if we're going to have our books have a different shape than just a cube, if we're going to add that curvature into the spine, we need to plug our original mesh into this. Let's watch the live stream prove me a liar again. And that also does not work. That also does not work. I have an awful habit of performing tests and then not saving, and then I can't remember how I solved it the first time. So let's see, we join geometry, and that all needs to be done here. Well, let's troubleshoot here. We can get rid of this. Subtract, that needs to be that. Maybe we need to use a, no, we don't have transfer attribute anymore. Let's see what we have. We have a capture attribute. Let's see what other attribute nodes we have. Maybe I'm using the wrong one. Attribute. Named attribute. Capture attribute. Attribute statistics. Store named attribute. That's, of course, what we're using at the end. Remove, domain. Let's see, because store named attribute is this one. Yeah, that's the same as that one. Named attribute, that's just to call upon an attribute, yeah. Which we're just trying to create an attribute. Capture attribute. Maybe we have to, I doubt this, but maybe we have to change it from point to instances? Oh, maybe. No, that makes it worse. Let's go through point, edge, face. I think it's point because we want it to be stored. We want this attribute to be stored on the vertices. Well, let's mute our join geometry and just have one of those books coming through. Yeah, and that still works fine, even if we change the scale of this book. The cover still remains consistent. Let's see. We unmute that. Still have a problem here. Of course, as soon as I go live, little chapstick there, my plans are dashed. Let's see. Add these together, transfer. I doubt it would make a difference if we put it after the material here. No, it doesn't make a difference. Let's just try one of these. Okay, it does something. Why is it doing this for all of these? Let's just try everything. Okay. Of course, the attribute needs to have that information, so whatever goes into our join geometry has to be passed through this attribute thing. Let me shift drag over these just so that we only have one thing going in at a time. And I cannot find the solution to this particular problem, so I'm going to move on to a different problem. So let me just delete our second book here, since that does not work. We can get rid of this, Control X, unmute that, and maybe I'll try that again later. Let's plug that into there. Either one should do. Either one should do. Since that didn't work, I guess we don't need this either. So let's move on to the curvature, adding that curvature to the spine of our book there. And that's pretty easy. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove what we did in the shaders. That did that same effect. As we can see, the little specular highlight there, it kind of looks like the front of it is curved. That is here, the spine curve. So what I'm going to do, I think if I mute this, yeah, that should make it flat. So we'll just mute that for now. I guess I could delete it all, but I'll just mute it for some reason. So let's add a set position. Let's add a set position node. And if we move this on the Y, I think, yeah, that's the direction that we want. And I'm also going to get a, let's see. I know why it wasn't working a while ago, but I already moved on, so I'll fix that later. So let me do this. Let's just make the shape of our book, and then we'll get back to getting this system to work with multiple books. So we want the front of this book, again, to be curved. So we do that with the same principle that we did for in the shaders here. So what we did is we took the generated texture coordinates, and we took the X from that, which if we visualize that, it gives us a factor of 0 to 1, or which black to white, visualized as black to white. And then we put it through a few math nodes until it's black in the middle, and then it's white on both sides, and then we multiply it back so that it's at 1, technical stuff. And then we put it through power so that it goes from black at the part that we want to be curved out the most, and then white on the sides. And then we just flip that around, which I suppose isn't necessary. So we need to do the same thing here. So what we can do, oh, that's what I did. So this will actually pave the way to solving the problem that I was trying to solve a while ago. So we need to have that same system on this book. So what we can do is we can, I guess, do a capture. Do we need a capture attribute for that as well? I'll just add one, I suppose, and then I'll decide if I really need it. Capture attribute. And what I'm going to do instead, because we need the cube that we start with to be 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, that way it fades from a value of 0 to 1 on each side. But then we'll rescale it to these factors that we created here, to the size of the book that we want in the again. So I'm going to add a, what is it, transform? Yes, transform node again. And I'm going to copy the scale. I'm going to paste this into here if it'll let me paste, and it doesn't because this is length data in meters and centimeters, but this is just scale, just factor of 0 to 1 or otherwise. So I'll type in 0.003 for 3 centimeters, 0.15 for 15 centimeters, and 0.2 for 20 centimeters, and then I'll click and drag down on all 3 of these and set them to 1. And we should have a book that's about the same size, except I put 2 O's instead of 1. It's 3 millimeters thick. Now we have a 3 centimeter book again. And let me visualize our finishing material again, just because I was visualizing the other thing. Okay, so the reason we did that is we need to capture a position attribute. So I'm going to add position here. And again, position should give us basically the same thing as this generated here. So if we look at this, we see a bunch of colors overlapping each other. But if we were to look at them one at a time, we would see over right here, it's 0 for the red, but it fades to red here. From this corner, from this side, it starts at 0 and fades to green the further back the book goes. And here, if we start at, let me move over, well, let me just do this. If we start at the bottom here, then it's a factor of 0 for the z-axis, but then it fades to blue towards the top. So it fades from a factor of 0 to 1 on all three vectors. And we are looking to get that same thing in the geometry nodes. And that's what this position will do. So let's capture this attribute for ourselves to use. Let's change this. I keep clicking on the wrong one. It's the top one we need to change to vector. And let's plug position into here. And this is a little bit hard to visualize because I don't know, maybe if we switch to solve, I haven't used, let's see if we visualize the position thing here. Yeah, I don't know exactly how you're supposed to visualize things in geometry nodes. I am still wrapping my head around geometry nodes. Boy, am I wrapping my head around geometry nodes. Okay, let's get rid of that. Actually, I guess we can keep it, let's put it in material preview. How about that? So that we can see something, but we don't have to wait for it to render. Okay, so again, we need to separate X, Y, Z, similar as we did in the shaders. So let's separate X, Y, Z. And let's just, I guess we don't really need to capture the attribute. I'll keep it there just in case. Let me conduct this little test first. So we want to move part of the cover or the spine of the book forward like this. So that will be, let me check again. I did this a while ago, but I have to check again. Yes, we want that to go in the negative direction actually, but that's okay. We'll figure that out. So let me do a combine X, Y, Z. That way we can plug something into only the Y. Let's take this X and plug it into the Y and see what happens. And that does not work. That does not work. Because I'm doing it on the wrong one. I'm doing it on the wrong one. So that's to rescale our book. That's to rescale our book. What we want to do is add a set position node so that we can set position, so that we can move parts. Because what this wants to do is it wants to move the whole, boy, this wants to move the whole object. We just want to move certain vertices, which we don't have yet. Which we need to turn up. Well, I'll figure that out here in a bit. So let's plug into the position here. Try that again. Or should it be offset? We'll just do position. No, we don't want position. We want offset. So if we move this on the Y, then that is what we want. But if we plug this X into that Y, or anything into that Y, then it'll move certain parts of it. And that gives us an interesting result. That might mess with things a little bit more than I wanted. So, but before we figure that out, let's set this to solid just so that isn't bugging me some, well, maybe I do want to see what's going on with the material. So let's do kind of similar to what we did down here. So, let's see. Actually, the first thing I need to do is I need to correct this position a little bit. The reason is this position tracks everything from the center. So the center is at 0, but we want it to be at 0 at one extreme of the object. Now this little guy is already a meter across, so we need to move everything back half a meter. I believe maybe it's forward, but I think we need to move it back half a meter. And of course that moves this over because it's way too strong. So let me just finish that off by multiplying it. And I think we'll want to land up multiplying it by a negative number. So, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting how that works. That also makes me wonder something else. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We're just worried about the shape right now, and we'll fix whatever is happening with the material later. So let's set it to that first. So now let's add an add math node, and we'll set it to -5. And again, this is a little bit hard to visualize, but I'll explain maybe a little bit later. But basically, we're just doing the same thing that we did yesterday or Friday during the last stream down here in the shaders. So we added a -0.5 add. Then we add another math node. Let me move this down a little bit. And we'll set this to absolute. If I can read it there, absolute. So again, what this has done is it has taken our factor that goes from 0 to 1 and moved it down, and this absolute will take what is now negative numbers and flips it around like this. And then we want to multiply that which we could multiply this before or after that absolute, and we'll multiply it by 2. Because we moved our texture over by 0.5, now the sides are at a value of 0.5 instead of 1, so this just makes sure it's at a value of 1 again. For easier to control, and again, it's a little bit hard to visualize, but hopefully this will become clear when the process is over. Yeah, I don't think we need this. I don't think we need this capture attribute node, but we may use it later, and I think we have 2 of those things setting around. I think I had another one over here. So, bunch of random stuff. So then after that, we multiplied it, then we went through a power of 2 just to take what would be like a pyramid shape and rounding it around so that it actually has a curved form when we change the shape of that book. And then we did a map range to invert it, but I think multiplying it by -1 should do the same thing. Okay, so now it moves our thing way over here and it looks skewed. It should look even on both sides, so we might have a bigger problem than I hoped, but we cannot see for sure. Let me just turn this down a little bit more so it's a little bit easier to judge. Yeah, we'll try that. -0.5. I have no idea how this is going to work in the end. But this isn't going to curve anything because we need more vertices along the width of the book. So let's do that. I think this will be along the Y. So let's just turn that up to 8. And I do not know. So let me switch to wireframe mode. Yeah, that's all along the wrong way anyway. So let's turn up the X is what we want. Yes, because we're moving it along the Y, but the data needs to be along the X. Okay, let's go back to material preview, and let's see what is happening here. So let me start over with this and multiply this out. So it should be, I guess we did need to do that, because this is just capturing the general position. We need it to capture the position of this object specifically. So we do need that. So let's take our position. And again, sorry if this is a little bit complicated, but basically what we're doing here is we're saying that we want to capture the position of this cube before we squish it into a book shape. And that's what we want to use. So, okay, I think that is what we want. So now let's plug our system in again, and that should give us kind of what we want. Or like, not. Set this to 0.5, so it's a little bit more. Actually, it kind of is. It's just offset. It's just offset in a strange way. So maybe this does need to be in a positive number. It does need to be 0.5. Okay, that's what we want. It's just switched the wrong way around. So let me just set this to 0. Okay, so that gives us some good curvature if we just put this up to like 0.01 or something like that. Yeah, if we just view this in solid view, we can see it's giving us curvature. We just have to get the material to comply again. Let's turn this down to 0.5. Now, one thing I would like to do, 0.005, is I would like to have each book that we create have a different amount of this curvature. Kind of like we see here. I think there was a better example down here. Like we have some books, like this. Where am I? Some books like this blue one here that have quite a bit of curvature, but then we have other ones like, say, this blue one or this yellow one over here that's like a little bit more flat. And I'd like to add that as something that is sort of a random value that each individual book has different. But for now, we'll just give it one single value. And I think now's the time to see if we can fix the problem that we have here with our shader. So again, the shader that we created was to give a cover to a square, a completely cube-shaped object. But of course, it's not cube-shaped anymore. We have that curvature now. So what we have to do is get the attribute that we are capturing for this bounding box here. Actually, we don't need it for the bounding box itself. We need it for something else. And this is the problem that I was trying desperately to solve before, and now I remember how to solve it. So let me decide. Yeah, since this should fix both problems, let me go back and add a second book again. So let me just add another, let's see, this is a set position. This is the scale of the book. So let me just add another book here. Let me add a transform geometry again. We'll plug this into here. And let's make a couple of books again. So let's see. Set position. What do we have that there for? I do not know. I don't think I need it. So let me capture our attributes for this guy as well. So we'll plug that into there. And then we'll plug this into our join geometry. And we want the scale information for our books to both be passed into, whoops, to both be saved into this attribute that we're using in our shaders. So we can do that simply by adding them together. And this might look quite awful at first. Actually, it's not too bad, but we can see the books are both overlapping. So let's move this guy, the second book, over. Yeah, over maybe negative 5 centimeters. And they won't have a different scale like I tried to do at first. Although I don't know if I was recording then because of technical problems. But we can worry about that later. Okay, so we have 2 different books. And now what we need to do is we need to take the information that records everything as far as the sides of the book, the front, the back, and all that. We need to have that be captured per object. Basically what it is it's this this generated texture coordinate here. It's basically the same idea as that, except again, if we were to visualize this, if that makes it any easier to comprehend, but over here it's at a value of 0 and it fades over to 1 on the other book. We needed to get it to fade from 0 to 1, 0 to 1 on each book. So we have to generate another attribute inside of here. So let's do another store named attribute, and we will call this book I don't know, book something. I'll just call it book for now. And I'm going to copy that name and get ready to add this attribute in our shaders here. So I'm going to add an attribute node in shaders, and I'm going to paste that name in. And by the way, hello to everyone who is watching. I think I have two viewers right now. Thank you guys for logging in. I hope that what you see me doing today is fun or entertaining somehow, even if it's just the pain of me trying to figure out when I've made a mistake. So this is going to be basically what this is. And in fact, we might be able to use the same thing as this. Let's just plug this in, since we already captured that for the stuff to shape our book. Let's plug that into there, and that's not good enough for it. So I think what we need to do, let's see, it captures the attribute, it captures the position attribute. I wonder, I feel like that should do it. Let me make all this stuff a little bit more concise here. It's easier for me to read. So let's see, we captured the attribute. Oh, we're not using the attribute in shaders. We can't visualize something if we're not, well, visualizing it. So let's take our attribute here, because that is in fact what we created here. Because what we're viewing now, of course, is this generated texture, or it was, yeah, the generated texture coordinates. But we need to be viewing our equivalent of that, so we can Control-Shift-Click with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled once or twice. And yeah, we can see that each book, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but its fate, it looks rather dark on this screen. So let me turn up the exposure here. Yeah, we can see that it whoops, move my mouse over here, I don't need to disappear. We see that it fades from, excuse me, from 0 to 1 and 0 to 1 per object. And that is exactly what we want. Let me change that back to negative 3.5. Yeah. And so I think that's basically all. I think we fixed everything with just that one thing. So yeah, we recorded the 0 to 1 position of our book, and then we just transferred that over to something that we can use in shaders. That's simple. A lot simpler than some of the other stuff I just did. So what we need to do now, let me visualize our end material again so I can see what it's actually going to look like. So let's see, hopefully this is the magic. Everything that we have, let's see. So here we have object texture coordinates, so we don't want to replace that. So everything that is plugged into a generated field on a texture coordinates node, we can replace that with our system. And I think I had another one. Oh, I had it inside of these groups. So let's see, what does that do? Well, actually that's quite irrelevant because I'm not even using this system anymore, because we're doing that in geometry nodes now. For anyone who is just logging in the previous tutorial, live stream, it's not really a tutorial. If you see the curvature that we just added to our books here, we did that in the shaders. But since we're doing it in actual geometry now, I can just get rid of all of these just to not confuse myself, which is what I should have done in the first place. So where we're actually using this is these little group nodes that we created, which is what gives us the data for the size that the covers should be. So what I'm going to do, because if we look in here, we are using this, the generated texture coordinates. So I'm going to add, because I think I deleted it, I'm going to add another group input. And I'm going to make that attribute inputable. So I'm going to replace everywhere that I have generated plugged into, and I'm just going to delete that. Now if we tab outside of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that vector we just created, and I'm going to have it say hide value, because we don't need to see those things. It can just be a little input there, kind of like the vectors we have on these guys. We don't see any 3 vector things. And now we could do either way. So if we added another texture coordinate node and plug generated in, we would have the same thing. But now we can plug our own system into these, and hopefully it kind of works. It kind of works. So this apparently needs to be shifted over some. We could do that either in geometry nodes or in shader nodes, but let me just do it in shader nodes just because. So let me just add a value so I can add to all of these things at the same time, because I think that is what's happening. So let's turn this up. Yeah, it needs to be an addition of 0.5. Yeah, and that does it. I think I would rather that be in here though. So let me see if I can do oh. So yeah, let's just use that raw. So the reason it's offset is because we did offset the position stuff, but we did it before the system that we use to add curvature to our book. But what we actually need to do, if we alt click drag on this, we need to do that before here so that that attribute is captured that way. And because we did it here, then it still uses that through here anyway. So everything should be, well, in theory, should be hunky-dory here. But that was a positive number there, wasn't it? So yeah, we need to have it be a negative number there, but for some reason, we need it to be the other way over here. So let's just do that to this one vector, since all we need is the x here. And let's move this over to probably a -1 now, add -1, so that we have the curvature of our book and we have the cover. So that's kind of the cool thing, because when we created this material to give covers to these books, it was made for a straight object with a flat front side. But since all of that data is not just part of the position in 3D space, but that's actually captured on the vertices of the object, if we move those vertices around, if we take that curvature and move it around, then that information is stuck to those vertices, so we get a curved data. And let me just experiment with other, let me find my little cube here, with different resolutions of that. I have 8 vertices there. Let's see how few we can get away with a distant. That's interesting. It changes the cover. So if we have 4? Is there really 4 there? Oh, yes, because we need one more than that. We need an even number. So if we render that, now we have 4 faces, and if we go up to that's actually good enough for me. I don't know, maybe 7. So we have 6 faces, 7 vertices and 6 faces. That looks pretty good. So in theory, what we could do somehow is we could kind of array these like we did here, except this is way too monotonous to do it the same method for like 10 or 20 books. But we could have multiple of these, and they should each work. That being said, let me experiment with that. Let me see if we can add a mesh line and make kind of an array modifier. And I do not know if this is going to work, so this might be kind of for naught. But let me just see. So let's create a mesh line, and let's add an instances on points. Instances. I guess I have to spell it out. Instances on points in order to find it. So we're going to take this mesh line, which, let's just visualize what is happening here. Let's go to solid view and Shift-Alt-Z. If we see what's going on here, we just created a line somewhere that is apparently invisible because we probably have to give it, put this here. Let's mute that. So we have our mesh line. It created a line for us, and we can have like 10 points on it. So then we're going to take those points and put instances on them, and that will be our book. Okay, and what we want is it to be moved over on the x-axis, and make that again about -5 centimeters for now, and let's just see what happens. I'm sure we're going to get some kind of errors here, and sure enough we are. Now it's just all the pages material. Oh, because we need to put it through our set material. Okay, so let's replace this with our join geometry that has our 2 individually created books. Let's just move this out of the way since that's not what we're using now. We'll delete that later. That is, if this works. Okay, so we have different books, but they all seem to have the same color. So let's address that first. So we used this node that we created in the last tutorial. We used random per island because we were using an array modifier before, which meant that they were all part of the same object, of course, but they weren't connected to each other. So random per island worked fine. But in this case, we can use random per object. Even though this is still all the same object, random per object can also mean random per instance or random per particle. And that's basically, well, that is what's happening in geometry nodes. So we have random colors on each of the books. And let me just move these guys over so that they're kind of against the side of the thing here. Okay, we have that. So we tackled that. The next thing that I would like to tackle is to see if we can give all of these books random sizes, which I kind of doubt we can do the way we did this. Because the other thing I am realizing is that, yeah, so let me delete the second book that I made, since we don't need that. And what's this? Join geometry. Let's clean this up a little bit. So we captured the scale attribute, which we did in the last video. Let's plug that back in. But see, now the problem is if we change the size of these books, it will still detect the size. It will still detect the scale of each of the books, and it will adjust the size of the cover accordingly, relatively, but we can only change all of them at the same time. So there's two ways that I'm imagining we might be able to get random sizes for these books as instances. However, I'm worried that one of them might not work. And that one is if we can add, I don't know, let me see if we have a random value. If we set this to, okay, so we need it to be random per instance. So let's say, I think we need an index for that. So index of, let's see what we have. We have sample index, material index, index of nearest, index of, we need instances. Let's see, instance, well, let's just go through the attribute here. We have input, we have geometry. Where would the indexes stuff be? Sample, right, operate, oh, that's in curve. I don't know what I'm looking in curve for. Instances, okay, instance on points, realize, instance on points, instance 2 points. Don't know how we get index. Index per instance. Create guide index? I don't think that's what we want. Well, we'll just plug this in anyway, and we'll add a map range node, and I think we'll try controlling the width of it first. So we'll also need a combine XYZ so that we can plug that just into the X. So before we do that, let's make sure our values are in there so that we don't lose the size that we want our books to have. But let's say the thinnest we want our books to be, is maybe 2 centimeters, and the biggest we want them to be is maybe 5 centimeters. So let's plug that into the X there. And let's plug our random in, and I doubted that was going to work, because I don't know how to plug an ID in here. Let me just look through instances again. Instance rotation, instance scale. Let's go through attribute. We have attribute statistic, domain size. I wonder if that's attribute statistic. No. Domain size, blur attribute, capture attribute, remove named attribute, store named attribute. Let's try input, constant, boolean, color, image, integer, string, group, scene, geometry, read, ID. That might do it. Maybe, but watch it not work. Okay. But we might be on the right track. Let's see, we were ID, index, named attribute, position. I don't know. I think I'm on a wild goose chase here, trying to find a way to do it in the first method, so I think I'll move on to my second option, which I should be doing, but I'm still looking for some reason. Set ID? No. Normal, position, radius, sample, proximity, index of nearest, raycast, index, sample, nearest, right, set position, set ID, operations, bounding box. Geometry to instance, no. Join geometry, curve, okay. So I think I'm going to cancel that idea. So another possibility is to scale all of this after the fact. Yeah, so apparently we can't do it that way. So let me try. Yeah, I don't think there's a way to do this, because if we change, what I was thinking is we could change the scale of these instances after they are instances, but the problem is we won't be able to get the scale information to make sure that the cover part of the material scales appropriately or remains consistent, because if we're doing that with the bounding box here. And if we were to plug instances, well, I don't know, let's just try it. I know it's not going to work, but let's just try it here. Because if we plug the instances into here, yeah, it doesn't know what to do. So we need to have the individual books being in there. Because if we were to change the scale, so we might not be able to have randomly sized books. We might not be able to have randomly sized books. So we'll have to leave it like that for now, and I will have to experiment with that a bit later on. So, yeah, let's move on to something a little bit more fun, at least for me, and that is trying to add gibberish text to all of these things here. Now, one thing I want to have first of all is I want to make sure that we can randomize each book so that each book will get a different title. So let me see if our randomness thing here can do that. If we do, well, yeah, it's the same thing, random per object. Yeah, so that should be fine. We should have that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another material, and it's going to be a kind of a gold flake kind of material. Oops, what am I looking for? I'm looking for principled. I'm going to add the principled shader, and I'm going to set this up with kind of a gold leaf color, and I'm going to turn the roughness up like that, and that's going to be the embossed kind of gold letters. And we're going to need another mix thing here. That's Alt-P to get that unconnected. And clicking on stuff I don't mean to click on. And let's plug that in there. And of course, now we need a factor to turn into letters. So I'm going to add... Oh, how should we do this? How should we do this? Let's do... Well, let's start off with a Voronoi texture. Let's start off with a Voronoi texture, but I'm going to visualize some stuff with this first. And I'll explain why I'm using this. I'm going to take a Voronoi texture and I'm going to turn the randomness all the way down. And then if we were to visualize the colors, of this, let me just turn the exposure up to 0 so it's a bit easier to see, or, well, potentially easier to see. So we get little squares, and what we can do is we can turn each of those squares into a little letter, basically. But the way I'm going to do that is, let's see. So I'm going to take a texture coordinate node. So I'm going to press Control-T just to bring that up, and I'm going to delete that because I don't actually need it plugged in there. And I'm going to look at my object here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by making one giant letter, and then I'm going to use this Voronoi texture to make it look like a bunch of smaller letters. So I'm going to add a separate XYZ. Just get my quick favorites here, separate XYZ. And let me do this as generated first, just so that I can see. Okay. So what would actually be the best way of doing this? Well, let's just create a little square at first that will be kind of like maybe a letter I, at first. Let's just do a bunch of I's. Volume 1, Volume 2, I guess that's what all these books are going to say at first. So I'm going to do rather the same thing, and I guess this shape will probably be most legible. I guess it could be legible anywhere. Let's focus on putting it on the cover of this book, which I guess, let me move this guy over so that we can see that. We'll start from there. Move this over and visualize this guy, and then let's just look at this last book here, and let's try generating a big giant letter I on here basically, and then we'll scale it down using this Voronoi texture. So I'm going to add -1 or -0.5 so that it's visualized. Let's see, what do we want? We want this on Y here. We're going to plug an absolute into that. so that we get that. And I'm going to do the same thing with Z here. And then I'm going to add a maximum, I believe, and plug that into there. Then let's move all this over so it doesn't look quite so wonky. Then we're going to add a greater than. Let's do greater than. And let's make that point greater than 0.25, I suppose. Okay, and we have something. So now what we can do, we can make this look a bit more like a letter I. So let's just plug this into here so that it, I don't know, kind of looks sort of nice. And we want, let's see, we want that to be less than. We want that to be less than so that the white area, which will be our second socket here. Okay, let me randomize the color of my books a little bit more until this one is blue, which we get right away. Okay, so let's try turning this into a letter I. And then I might have to call it after this, because I might have to close this live stream a bit sooner tonight. And I don't have many viewers right now, so this might not be very interesting to anyone. But maybe someone will find it useful, and nonetheless, I'm having fun. So let's shape this first. We have to move this over so that this makes sure that our letter is centered. So let us take this and let's multiply it. And let's actually divide it. Let's divide it to make it a skinny, kind of a skinny letter I. Okay. You know, one thing I think I'm going to do first is instead of adding this here, I think I'm going to kind of do that same operation here. I'm going to add, what was it, negative 0.5? That way I don't have to change it for both of these. It's just there, and then I can multiply it from there. Yeah, actually I can, can't I? If I plug here, I can make this letter bigger or smaller. If I do a divide and set it to, like, say 0.5, then it makes that letter smaller, which will come in handy later. Let's add a value node, which I should add to my quick favorites. There we go. That way next time I can press Q and add a value there. And let's plug that in and make this a 0.5 or something for now. So that makes a nice little kind of letter I shaped thing. But one thing I also want to do is add those little serifs, which are, so if you have a letter like a letter I, you have like the little flat parts on the top and the bottom. They kind of look like little feet on letters in serif fonts. So I'm going to see if I can do that. And I think in order to do that, I will need to isolate the, let me see, tell you what, let me do this at a factor of 1. So that's where the feet will appear. And I'm going to multiply this down here. Okay. So I think what we need to do is take our Z, which should, let's do it after the absolute. Yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that minimum and maximum. No, I'm going to do it before the minimum and maximum. So what I'm going to do is take the width, which is controlled by our little Y factor here, and I'm going to, I guess, add to it. Or I guess we want to subtract from it in this case. Yeah, that'll make it wider, but I'm going to make it to where it only gets wider on the bottom. So I'm going to take this factor, and let's see what this looks like. And I'm going to make it, for now anyway, which I guess is probably the easiest way, I'm going to make it greater than, and that should give us what we want, at least initially. And I'm going to plug that into the subtract. Let me just set this to 0.5, just because, I don't know, OCD, I don't know. Okay, so we get a little bit of a serif, so then all we have to do is just turn this up as high as we want those serifs to come in, and we get a little serif. But I'm going to get a little bit that already looks like a little letter I, which is fun. So I'm going to do something a little bit extra. Instead of just having just the flat kind of serifs thing, let me show kind of what I'm talking about here. Let me bring up something that has typography on it. Letters. Let's see. Let me go to my projects and tutorials. Yeah, let me bring up the little thing that I did for the thumb. So in the thumbnail, this is the little this is the little system that I made for the thumbnail. And we have letters here, so let's look at that as kind of a reference. I don't know why my head keeps moving over. Yeah, so if we look at a serif like here on the bottom of the in this case, that little serif kind of has a little curve, to it. So I am going to try to do that here as well, which means not using this greater than thing. So what I want to do is isolate the area just above. I want to isolate the point between the bottom of the serif and then the little part above the serif. Actually, I want to isolate it from that part of the serif and then move the curvature up. Just so you all know, I just saw some emoticons in the chat. However, in my viewer here, it says I have 0 concurrent viewers. So I don't know if that means I'm also not getting chats. I don't know if I'm not, because I don't see any comments in the chat. So I apologize if I'm not replying to anyone. Let me check in my browser just to see if that shows me something. Let's see. Yeah, so I might be having some technical difficulties. So if you haven't chatted, then maybe that's okay. But if you have if you have sent me some chats, I'm not seeing them right now. So apologies if I'm having technical trouble in that regard. Let me just check on that real quick. So let me click on my thing here just to make sure. I don't want to miss anybody if they are chatting with me. I don't want to miss any. Hi, CoolDogGX says hi. My other program that I'm using isn't showing. Oh, it is showing it. Okay. Hello. Thanks for joining in. Gotta love the modern age of technology with so many things that can go wrong. So in order to get a little bit of curvature there, like I said, I need to isolate the height above the bottom of the serif, or actually the top of that serif there, and then like how high I want that curvature to go flush with the side of the eye there. So basically all we need is a map range node. So let's visualize this is going to be a little bit hard to visualize, but let's visualize this. And let's add a map range node, which is of course the easy way of doing this. And I want to make sure that clamp is on, which I'll explain why. But let us bring this down here, and let's bring this down to 0.9. I think that's where we had our serif. So let's put it up to something like that. And let's visualize. Well, actually, it's not going to do much good to visualize. Oh, actually, we can just plug this right into our subtract like we had before. So what we should see, yeah, now we see a line, a gradient kind of thing. They're replicating this thing that we did here. Now, the good thing is at the top of where it starts to curve, it's black. And at the bottom of it, it's white, which is very handy for another function, which I used in the last live stream, which I mentioned I use all the time. That is, I'll take a math node and set it to power. Now, if I set this at an exponent of 1, it looks exactly like it did before. But what this does, in case you don't know, this is very handy. If we turned up to, like, say 2, any number above, look at what happens to that gradient in the middle there. Watch it get darker. So if we visualize what's happening here, it's actually easing. It's actually easing, kind of like if you have a gradient texture and you set it to easing, or maybe something like B-spline or something, it's kind of doing that. So if we visualize here, and of course we have to plug what we just did there into our subtract of the width of the eye, we see we get, it's not just that straight, that straight curve like that, or that straight line diverging into each other, it's curving now. So if we turn this up, then that curve becomes more pronounced, which actually what I would like to do, which maybe it's not a huge deal, let me just zoom in on this just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So if we set this to a power of 2, what it's doing, let me see if I have enough space up here. So what this is doing is it's basically taking, so what it used to be, it used to be, to visualize, it used to be a straight line from here to here. But what it's doing is it's keeping this part sort of straight as it goes into that curve, but this part is still at an angle. What I would like to do is have it start out straight here as well and go into almost a circle shape. So in order to do that, we can, it's pretty simple. We can just invert this thing so that it, like this, we just invert it, make it to where it goes white to black instead, and then add another power after that. And then if we move all of this craziness over, if I can grab these nodes, and if we plug that in, and we visualize what that's doing now, it looks absolutely horrible because we need to invert it again so that it goes white to black once more. And now it still looks awful. Oh, because I copied the first one, so let's have it go 1 to 0. Okay. So now let's plug a value in so that I can control both of these at the same time. Let's plug that into there and that into there. Now if we give it an exponent of 2, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. And that isn't doing exactly what I hoped, and I think, oh, I know why. I know why. So for the second one, it's a little bit hard to explain why it's doing this. But basically, let me just cut both of these. So let me just set this back to 1. So we want this to be, oh, actually both of them are acting differently now. I might have to nix that whole idea. Or, oh, whoops. Okay, make sure that, yeah. I copied the wrong map range node. I need to make sure, okay, there we go. Now I think that's doing what I want it to do. Let's turn this up to 2 and see. Yeah, that does have the opposite effect. So this one needs to be the opposite ratio of this one. If we turn this up to, 2 or 3, this one needs to be a factor of that 1 divided by 2, or however you want to think of it. If we have 3, this one should be 1/3, which we can do that very easily by simply adding a divide, 1 divided by 2. Like what we're going to use here, but then we plug this into there. It's a little bit hard to explain. One of these days I need to make a video that explains especially what this power math node set to power does, because it's a very handy function. I use math node set to power for a lot of different things. So if we turn this up, we can, so if we turn this to 1, then it starts out the same way, just having that that diagonal. I can get my hand in a diagonal shape, but the higher that we turn this number, the more curved it becomes. In fact, if we were to turn this to like 100, that curve would be so severe that it actually just looks like a corner. So we can turn this up to 2 or 3 or 4, and it looks kind of like a serif on a letter. So one other thing I want to look at, so I have this less than here that divides between the cover material, the blue leather cover material, and like the gold embossed letters. Let me mute that and just see what this texture looks like here, just out of curiosity. Oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. So what if, because the idea is we could also make these letters more bold. Oh, I didn't even think of that. I don't know if I like that. So what's happening here is, remember that pattern that we just saw? This expands it along that. Well, one thing I think we can start with, let me mute this again. Let's see, that's clamped. That's clamped. Let's make sure all of this is clamped. Okay. So if we clamp on this absolute here, then that makes sure that we don't have that weird shape going on up there. This is all technical typography stuff, which is another thing I like. But anyway, it makes well, let me just kind of show you what I'm talking about. You could probably see it anyway, but if we turn this up to high, we can see that those little serifs, it's a little bit difficult to see. Maybe that's not what's happening, but all I know is we can see this, it kind of looks like an hourglass shape. It kind of, let me move my big head out of the way. It kind of looks like an hourglass shape. It's kind of fanning out this way up here and fanning out that way down here. So if we were to make that eye like more bold, then it runs the risk of kind of being more hourglass shaped, although I don't think that's exactly what's happening. But if we clamp this absolute here, then that fixes that. Let me see what happens if I clamp this absolute math node here. Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Let's unmute that and see what that does. Oh, of course, it's not going to go that high. So if it's set there, it still looks all right, but that happens. So a lot of crazy things happen when we mess with that. So I am going to leave this one unclamped, and I'm afraid I can't really explain why, because this is just troubleshooting. This is just experimenting and seeing what works. Your guess is as good as mine. So what else would I like to do? Oh, the reason I did that, which I might not have to do, I might have to experiment with that at another time, but the reason that I wanted to see what it looked like without this less than on, I wanted to see what kind of gradient was created here, because I wanted to do something similar to the thing that I just mentioned. So in this texture that I made for the thumbnail, you note that around, so the white, the perfectly white areas are the parts that I used for the actual gold embossed lettering stuff on the cover. But you see how it fades out? It's kind of like blurred and glowing around here. What I did that for is I did that for a bump map, so that the brighter it is, the more impressed that embossing is, and therefore, since it's kind of glowing, or looks like it's glowing, it kind of fades around the edges. Then what that would do is toward the areas that are black, which will be like the regular part of the leather cover, if you take everything that's white or that fades toward white, it would be like, I don't know. I don't know how they make books, but I'm sure whenever they emboss the letters onto the cover of a book, it kind of brings down the leather around it, just a little bit around the edges. In fact, we can probably show that effect that I had if I bring up the thumbnail itself with another crazy me over there. Yeah, if you zoom in, you can see a little bit of the shading here. I think it's a little bit more obvious in this version when I didn't have so much compositing, or one of these versions. One of them, that one. A little bit more crisp detail without the compositing there. But yeah, you see like the little shadow on this side and then the little highlight on this side. It kind of gives that little bit of a 3D effect. I use that for a bump map in the material. And what I was hoping for is that we would get something that looks kind of similar here. Although just to make sure, I think what I'll do, just to make sure that let's add an add, and let's add negative. Oh, actually, that is what we want. That is just about what we want. If we set it to -1, all we have to do is clamp the top part, which I don't know why it doesn't show up here anyway. Let's see what happens if we turn this back on. And that's weird. I don't know how it got cut off in the first place. So yeah, all we have to do is just cut that part off. So we can isolate the Z vector again, same way that we did here, just so it's a little bit easier to follow, at least for me. I'm going to Control J and create some frames here. Let me move, whoops, caps lock. Shift, grab this stuff out of the way. If I can select my things, move that stuff out of the way. And I'm going to call this serif. So let's F2 to name that S-E-R-I-F. F, is it? There are 2 F's in serif? Anyway, it's a typographical term, letters and all that. And maybe that should be included in that. I don't know. Yeah. So maybe we'll move that. I don't know. Let's still makes it look like a tangled mess. But now what we're going to do, excuse me, let's visualize this again. And I guess we want to unclamp that because that wasn't causing a problem anyway. It just looks like it is when we viewed it the way we were a while ago. And what I want to do is, let's see, what do I want to do? So let's visualize what's going on here with that muted. So let me clamp this, let me clamp that. I guess that is what I want. However, I think that gets rid of that. Okay. I promise I'll try to explain what's going on here. So see, the thing is if you notice, let me just add sort of a power note here just to emphasize what I'm talking about. But you see that if we turn this blackness up, our factor ends right there. You see where it goes from where it starts, it ends the whiteness and starts to fade into black. Now, if we have that unclamped, then that's not a problem anymore. But we need it to be clamped in order to give us a cleaner line at the bottom of that little serif thing there. But if we unclamp it, so I think what we need to do is we just need to copy this so that we need both of them, in other words. We need this one to be clamped, I believe. Let's mute that, yeah. But I want to have control over anything that is under that letter. So like if we look at this again, I need another version of that so that we can control what happens underneath that serif there. So we need it to go on. We don't want to clamp that part. And if any more people are watching this either live or in the replay, I will be surprised because this is very, very geeky. But let's see, what did I do there? What did I kind of lost track of everything here? So I'm going to take this guy here. Let's delete these. And I'm going to add -1 so that way we can, I think, maybe -0.5. Perhaps, I don't know. It needs to go about right there, so. Oh, yeah, so unclamp this one, and that's the one that we want to be plugged in here. And let's add -1 so that we have that. And now what I'm going to do, let me view this. I am going to take this and I am going to, I don't know, I think we want to do add perhaps. That might not be what we want, but let's try that. Of course, I want to clamp that part of it. And I want to, I guess we'll unclamp that. And I'll clamp this one instead because I'm going to multiply that to get the fall off that I want. About like that. Let's clamp, which one do I want to clamp? Let's clamp that as well. Okay, a little bit janky, but it is what it is. Let's turn that up to like 10. And I think after I get this letter I done, I'm going to probably come close to finishing the live here. Okay, so now what that is going to be for, ooh, I messed up something else. Let's see, what did we do here? Oh, that's strange. So it should be, let's see what happens here if we turn this down like that. Oh, that's strange. What do you set it to 0? Oh, we do want it to be set. No, maybe we don't want it to be set to 0. Well, let's not clamp that then. Okay. Okay, so we have our letter here. Now what I want to do is take all that crazy stuff that we just did and tell you what, let me get rid of all of these extra books here just for the time being. And let me rotate this guy like that so that we can see him in the sunlight and move it out of the shadow of the window or the wall there so that we can kind of see what's going on. And now we're going to use that to add some bump mapping. So let me set my exposure back down. So now we're going to take this stuff that we just made and we're going to use that as a bump map. Except it's still kind of doing, oh no, that's fine. So all we have to do for that is take all of this mess, which I will probably organize a bit later, and we're going to add a bump map. That's not a bump map. A bump node, I should say. And so this is the bump that I have going into my cover material, which is what I want to affect, but this bevel thing needs to be last. So what I will do is I'll make some room over here, move these guys out of the way. And I'm going to add another bump map over this, which I'm still not sure if that's the correct way you're supposed to do that. I've heard that there's a right way and a wrong way, but nonetheless, I'm going to do that. Let me move my viewer over here. Let's view this again. And now, in principle, all we should have to do is plug this mess that we made into the height of that bump there, which is very hard to see, even for me. And I think we want to clamp that. Yes, we do. And actually we don't. So tell you what, let me clamp this in a different way. Let's do a minimum, I believe, a minimum of 1. Yeah, that'll do. And then now we just have to turn the distance all the way down to, like, say 0.01 or something. What if it's 0? What if we set it to 0? Wow, that's really strong. 0.001 point. There we go. Kind of. Except there's one other thing I need to do. So if you notice, let me just turn this up to like 0.05 or something to make it more obvious, so that the amount that embossing kind of pulled in that that letter, it starts very suddenly. So we need to have that ease in a little bit. So I'm going to use that same trick with power, except we're going to need it to do it the other way because it's going to do it to the black and we want it to do it to the white. So we're going to do something really janky and add a map range node and set it 1 to 0 so it'll invert it. And you know, we'll actually just keep it this way and invert it here, and then we can add a math node set to power, and then we can give it, say, a power of 2 or something like that. And that already looks pretty nice. Now we can just turn our bump distance down a bit, down to something like that, and we have our first embossed letter on the cover of the book that we just created. Let's see, how long have I been live streaming? About an hour and a half, and not very many views this time because this may have not been as interesting, but I thought I would give it a try because I thought it was fun, and I think that's all that matters. So I think I'm going to, boy, the bump on that leather material is really, really high too. Maybe I'll fix that real quick. I don't know. Let's find my leather thing here. Turn the bump down to, I don't know, 0.01. Let me make the scale of that bigger too. And now we have a nice kind of finished book with the letter I on it. And of course it takes a little bit to render. But other than that, that's pretty much all for today's live stream. And whether you're watching this, looks like I got one viewer now. One viewer now that just came in. Sorry you came in a little bit late. But yeah, that's what we get. We just added a completely procedural letter I as a gold leaf embossed title on a cover, which was fun, at least for me. So maybe as time goes on, I'll experiment with changing that factor a little bit. Anyway, I'll experiment with creating more procedural letters just because I can. Just because, yeah, hey, Amol. Yeah, sorry you joined a little bit late. Well, and frankly, I didn't have a lot of viewers here, I think, because maybe what I was doing in this live stream may not have been super interesting. So I thought of closing this, but since I have one viewer, that is if you care to stick around, and for anyone watching on the replay, I think I will try to do one more small thing, that is to take this giant letter and see if I can make it into a little title. That is, I'm not going to make a whole title with a bunch of procedural letters, but I'm just going to take this letter I and see if I can map it into like maybe several I's that later on I can turn into completely different letters. Yeah, you're welcome, Amol. I'm glad you joined. It's a little bit boring to record something with nobody watching, at least when it's a live stream, even though I know people can watch it in the replay. So the way I thought of doing this is, so the way we made this letter is we took the generated texture coordinates, which basically this is just 0 to 1 along the left to right, and then 0 to 1 along the top and bottom, and basically use that to like make our own procedural image, which was this kind of eye shape. So now what I want to do is I want to make that eye smaller, and I want to make an array of those, as it were, except in the shaders. Thank you. I'm glad you'll watch the replay. The first bit of it might have been a little bit boring. I don't know. Maybe you'll find it boring too if you watch the replay. But I think what's important is we have fun. At least I have fun doing this. So there's a few ways I can do this, and I think I'm going to do it a little bit crazy at first. I could do this either with a Voronoi texture, or yeah, let me just do it with a Voronoi texture, even though it's probably not the way that I'm going to land up doing it. So let me scale this guy down a little bit, which I think I do with this here. Yeah, make it a smaller eye. And I guess all this has to happen here. So I'm basically going to take these texture coordinates that we made our eye with and kind of turn it into an array, as it were, except in shader nodes and like an array modifier. So let's view our Voronoi texture to kind of see what we're doing. First of all, we don't want these crazy cobblestone Technicolor, well, in this case, Technicolor giraffe spots. So let's turn the randomness down to 0 so that we get just a bunch of squares, and that will do for now, just for demonstration purposes. But if we shift control click on this again with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, we see basically a Voronoi texture version of these generated coordinates. So what I'm going to do, let me see how big my letter I is in comparison to that. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, that should work. So I'm going to disrupt what we did to make this eye texture, and I'm going to set it to, I believe, subtract, and we're going to subtract what we did on the Voronoi texture from that. And now let's see what happens here, and let's try adding this over, because I think we moved our eye too far over, even though it should be showing up in different squares. It's just shifted completely out of any of the squares so that we do not see that eye anywhere. It's gone cut off. So let's try adding maybe 0.5 or negative 0.5, and we get our letter I's back. So let's make these guys a little bit smaller, 0.05. And of course, it's not exactly a title, but nonetheless, it's a way of getting a bunch of letters next to each other that later on I can use to turn into a completely procedural title of a book. And of course, if I were making an actual book that I wanted to be like a key prop in a scene, like a character is grabbing this book, this would not be used for that. This would be used more for just background objects. Like if you have a library, like some of our references here, like if we just had a library with a bunch of books and shelves, this is basically a bunch of procedural books that you would use there, in which hopefully I'm going to try to turn this into a bunch of gibberish text that looks like titles from a distance. And of course, for those logging in late, this started out as just a cube. And all it is now, I just added more loop cuts around the middle so that we have kind of that curve shaped for the book. But everything else, there is no cover, there are no pages, there is no crease behind the spine of the book cover. All of that detail that you see now, including the gold embossed letters, all of that is added in shader nodes. All of that is added in shader nodes, which I just realized I should probably, we have our letter mixing in with the pages there, so I should probably mix that with just the cover material. So let me move that around over here. Let me alt click and put that there, and take our shader and put it here. That way our pages show up correctly. And now let me take my system and plug it back in. And yeah, so everything is done in the shaders here, except just creating a cube and sizing it like a book, and then just adding a little bit of curvature there in geometry nodes, which we did earlier. All of this other detail was done completely in the shaders, which was done both in this video, in this live stream, as well as the last live stream, the live stream just before this one. So of course, adding the leather bump map and adding the little, yeah, I think I can reach it from here, the little crease behind the spine of the book. And of course, if we look here, the differences between the cover and the pages, which we'll have to let render a little bit because I do not have a super fast computer. But yeah, the difference between, we have the pages there, and we even have like a little bit of shadow, so it looks like that cover actually has geometry as the sunlight comes here, or the sunlight comes from this direction, and then it looks like there's a shadow behind that cover there. That's all done in the shaders. Why? I don't know. I think I find it fun, and I think it's also useful just to know what exactly is possible in shader nodes. And now I have the nightmare of trying to make this look all nice for myself in the future so that I can read it later, but that is it for now. All of this is what we created during the last live stream just before this one and this live stream. Besides, of course, the geometry nodes setup that we created to make one book or a few books, which if we turn that up to 5, we have a few different books, each with different random colors. Yes, actually, Amol, hopefully I'm pronouncing your username right. You can certainly correct me, tell me how you pronounce it. But I think it'll show up on the replay. But didn't know that the Voronoi position trick, didn't know that that was a thing. That actually just came out. I just noticed it, just I think 4.0. Oops, I'm looking at the wrong texture. It's the Voronoi over here. Way too much node noodle soup here. But yeah, it's if we turn the randomness up, you can tell that it's still a Voronoi texture, but each position of the little center of each Voronoi speckle thing gains the color, or that is the vector attribute of the position of that. And it can be handy for a lot of things. One thing that this is handy for, which I have done and was very excited to do, and probably will show on a future live stream, is I use this to create a bunch of different galaxies in 3D space, volumetric 3D space. Because of course this Voronoi texture is projected throughout 3D space. It's just kind of projected onto the 2D surface here of your object. But if you use a volumetric material, that Voronoi is projected through that 3D space. So I use that to take each little Voronoi cell and put a galaxy inside of it with another system that I made to make galaxies. So that is very handy. The reason that works is for a very similar reason that we did here. If we see what's happening here, actually, oh good, I'm glad I pronounced your username correctly. Yesterday I completely screwed up somebody's username. They told me how it was pronounced as well, and then a few minutes later I was saying it completely wrong again, even though I just saw how to pronounce it. But we see we have a bunch of different eyes here. The reason this works is this eye is generated on these texture coordinates, but when we take these pseudo texture coordinates from this Voronoi texture, and if we subtract one from the other, this is what we get, which might be a little bit difficult to see, but let me just subtract something else just for visualization purposes. If I subtract subtract 0.5, I guess. I usually add 0.5. Oh, that is add negative 0.5, add negative 0.5. And let me multiply it just to make it easier to see. All of this to make a point. But if we turn this up to, like, say 10, you see that where it's black in the middle, which is basically like the origin point of an object, but in this case, it's like the origin point of a texture, that is centered on each cell of this Voronoi texture. So since that is what we were using to make this little eye shape, which initially was just one little eye, now that one little eye appears in, that one little letter I appears in all of the places where there is a center of one of those Voronoi cells. Which, of course, if we turn the randomness down, it just looks like a grid. But you can do that same thing with something like a galaxy. If you make a galaxy with a node setup that is centered on your object, you can use that Voronoi texture to tell it actually there's a center over here and a center over here and over here. And it'll put a galaxy, one of those procedural galaxies that you created in the shaders, it'll have a duplicate of that. And you can do a bunch of other crazy things with that, but today we just used it to create a book with a title that just has a bunch of eyes on it, which I will probably be experimenting with in the future. But for now, I think that will be the end of this live stream. So kudos to anyone who watched it all the way through in the replay or otherwise, and can't wait to see you in the next video, whether that's a video tutorial or a live stream. So we'll see you in the next one.